You're listening to That Music Podcast with Bryson Tarvin, the curriculum designer and educational consultant behind That Music Teacher and the Elementary Music Summit. Each week, Bryson and his guests will dive into the reality of being an elementary music teacher and how music can truly be transformative in the lives of the students you serve. Show notes and resources mentioned in this episode can be found at thatmusicteacher.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to That Music Podcast. I am incredibly excited to welcome back to That Music Podcast Dr. Jennifer Whitehead. Dr. Whitehead, thank you so much for joining us again.
So glad to be here, Bryson.
So if you did not check out Dr. Whitehead's original episode, it's back in episode 56, back in 2021, which makes it feel like it's been so much longer than it actually has been. But we'll put the link in the description. But for those of us that, or those people, listeners that did not catch the original episode, can you briefly reintroduce yourself and share maybe any updates about what you've been getting into since we last spoke?
Sure. So my name is Jennifer Whitehead. I hold a doctorate of musical arts from Ohio State University, and I earned that in 2013 in my 40s, so I was a little late to that party. But I also, in conjunction with that, earned a certificate in singing health. So I did a lot of research and took a deep dive into vocal health for singers. And what I do is I'm a professor of voice and voice-related courses at Ohio Wesleyan University in Delaware, Ohio. I teach private voice for all kinds of students, musical theater, classical voice. I teach a musical theater history class. That may be new since we last spoke. And I teach diction for singers and voice methods, and I do a little bit of stage directing. So I wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, just a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah.
So we originally met at Ohio Wesleyan University when I was an undergrad. So I've had the wonderful pleasure of being able to be in your courses. I'm really excited. I that is new, that music history or musical theater history course. That's pretty cool.
Right.
So can you give us this 1,000-mile view of why vocal health is important for teachers originally, but especially music teachers?
Sure. Well, I think the obvious answer to that question is that as a teacher, your voice is your greatest teaching tool. It is the thing that you must have really in a most traditional teaching settings. And I think that a reason that it's important to talk about it and that it is important is that teachers need to learn to see themselves as professional voice users. We don't tend to think that way. We tend to think of professional voice users as maybe singers or maybe a news anchor, some kind of a TV or a radio or a podcast personality or a singer. We don't tend to look at teaching as a voice professional, but that is exactly what a teacher is. You're somebody who is using your voice to earn your bread and butter. So you're a professional voice user, and that is why it is so important that you maintain your vocal health.
Yeah, it's funny because, I'm a vocal major. I did all the vocal things. And it wasn't really until during COVID when I first started realizing that, I need to I will say I'm one of the lucky vocalists who just things just don't happen. It just happens easy. And I can eat all the milkshakes I want before a concert. I will say as I get older, that is not as much the case. But that was kind of my first reaction. I really need to start being careful with this because, we were teaching through masks. We had, we were farther away and things like that. So I totally get that. And I think it is really important that we talk about all teachers as those voice users, but music teachers especially. I mean, let's be honest, we use their voice a lot more than a traditional teacher, which they also use their voice a lot. So kind of shifting a little bit, I know branched into a little the COVID side of things, but how have you noticed any the vocal demands of teachers changing over the past, especially when we've been talking about shifting between remote, in-person teaching, and things like that?
Sure. I think that the remote teaching, I personally found it very hard on my voice.
Yeah.
And I think, like, even right now, I'm thinking about it, like, while I'm talking to you, I feel like when we get online and we're talking in an online format, we have a tendency to feel like we have to talk really loudly. And we really, especially I think when teachers were dealing with a classroom of kids, a virtual classroom, and they're trying to keep these kids engaged, um, I think the tendency was probably to speak too loudly. Um, I think when we're sitting at a computer and speaking, we're not in the best posture all the time. So we're kind of sitting there, kind of hunched over, not really supporting our voice. Um, I think another long term, both benefit and maybe casualty of COVID is that we learned that we can do a lot of things via an online platform. So that means you can always squeeze in one more meeting, or you can always have this one more talk because we've reimagined the fact that we have to get everybody together to do it. So your work day may have been extended a little bit because of the ability, and the recognition of the ability to use these kinds of platforms. Um, I also think, like you said, talking through masks was a whole challenge. Um, and I think that wearing masks for good reason, I think that's been normalized a little bit now. So if people are feeling under the weather, or they're going to be around somebody that they don't want, that might be immunocompromised, they'll wear a mask. And so that can add another layer to teaching if you're one of those people. And I also think that the whole COVID dynamic hurt
Yeah.
kids' concept of what classroom etiquette is and how to be in a room with a bunch of other kids and a teacher. I think young kids were already at an age where that was hard for them. And then you send them home for months at a time and they come back, and reining them in is a special kind of challenge. So yeah, I think COVID had some very wide-reaching impact.
Yeah, and I think quite frankly, a lot of our younger teachers, their in classroom experience was changed very drastically because of COVID restrictions. And I mean, I think about people that were student teaching in 2020, and all of a sudden they were, but they weren't, and everyone's trying to figure it out. It's like I think a lot of the times we would learn in a traditional student teaching or field experience placement, these classroom management things that don't involve us just kind of relying heavily on shouting or getting above the noise. uh, but who knows if they necessarily got that. And I love how you mentioned the, like, when we're on Zoom and stuff, we feel like we have to overtalk, because I actually wear headphones when I record these, not so that I can hear myself and because otherwise I would do exactly that. I shout way too loud. And things like doing it like the elementary music summit, when I'm like talking all day, by the end of the day I'm like done. So by doing this, I have a little bit more feedback into myself, so I can hear myself talking, so I don't feel like I have to yell. So I love that you brought that up.
I think there's something about, like, we are seeing ourselves in this sort of two-dimensional format, and we feel like we have to make ourselves really big.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of funny. It sort of reminds me of when I was growing up, and my grandmother, who wasn't used to long distance calls, if she was talking to you long distance, she would yell into the phone because she
I
thought
love
that
it.
it had to be louder. And that's kind of how COVID felt to me, you know. Because I think the other thing about it was I think we were overcompensating because we knew it wasn't the best format for kids. We knew, um, that holding their attention was that much harder, and so I think our tendency was to just amp it up that much more and make an already, demanding job even more demanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about COVID, and obviously it was awful. But some things have come out of that experience that have been beneficial in the long run. The one thing I think of is a lot of schools upgraded their HVAC systems to help, at least hypothetically, remove a lot of the the allergens. Maybe they found some mold, or things like that that could traditionally hurt your voice or get you sick more often, which could cause more strain. So I'd be interested, can you talk a little bit? I know that's not necessarily exactly related to this question, but can you talk a little bit about the impact of the classroom environment? Obviously, noise levels are things that are important, acoustics and things like that, whether or not they have a microphone or any sort of sound system, on what that can do, or what effect that can have on teachers and their vocal strain.
For sure. Yeah, environment is a huge part of vocal health and vocal health challenges. And I think, particularly when people are teaching in maybe a school district that is struggling. Maybe they haven't passed their levy, um, and they're dealing with old buildings. You are dealing with things like mold, perhaps, and you're also just dealing with structural. It's not an updated space. Maybe it's very dusty. Um, Maybe you're just kind of in this big sort of almost like a cave, but it's not good acoustically. You mentioned a microphone. I think a microphone is very key, very, very key for teachers. Teaching in almost any environment now, in a music setting, I think it is really, really an important thing. But yeah, I think rooms can be, sometimes they're really big, and so the teacher feels like they're kind of screaming into a cavern. Sometimes they might be small and stuffy, and so because the acoustics aren't good, when acoustics aren't good in a room, we do what we tend to do on Zoom, which is we tend to overspeak because we think we're not very loud because the room isn't giving us any help. So for sure, and I think crowded conditions contribute to that too. How many kids you've got packed into a room at a time can be a big factor.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I started having more issues with my voice as COVID started flaring up. I never taught with a microphone, but neither of my classrooms had that set up. But once we started working through a mask, and quite frankly, I should have gotten a microphone while I was working on through a mask, but I just kind of dealt with it. And then afterwards, I noticed that my voice had really taken some damage. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I was able to get some microphones that were pretty affordable and hooked up to pretty much whatever microphone I have. I'll put the links to my favorites in the show notes. But it was night and day. I mean, it was so much easier. And I talk a lot about accessibility and making sure that, students are able to hear you and understand you and make it, have that kind of accessibility, which is great with this microphone. But then also the teacher health side of things. And one thing I do want to mention is if you get some pushback from your administrator, first of all, the options that I'm going to give are like $50. So even if you have an administrator that regardless, and after all these other things, they're like, no, we can't do it. It's $50. It's worth it. I promise. But also like that is a reasonable accommodation in a workplace. A lot of times if you ask your doctor to write something up and say, hey, they're experiencing some vocal fatigue, this, yada, yada, yada. Like that is a thing as an employer that they kind of have to do. So that is a way that you can kind of navigate that. But I see a lot in these Facebook groups about like, hey, we're getting a new building. What would you recommend? And my first thing is always microphone, a microphone, a microphone, a microphone. I student taught in a classroom that had a built-in microphone system with like a lapel mic, and it was amazing. And I miss it every single day. Because it's just, like you said, it's just so important.
That's awesome. Yes. And you have alluded to something a couple times that I think, particularly young teachers need to tap into. When we're young and we're starting out, that vocal load, particularly if you have a fairly resilient voice, voices are different. Some people can really kind of abuse their voice and get away with it for a while. Some people have a more fragile instrument. But regardless, what our voices and our bodies can take when we are 25, 26, 27 changes a lot in just the next decade. And as we age, we have to be thinking about the longevity of our career. A
Yeah.
singer would certainly do that. A teacher has to do the same thing and has to start thinking, I've got to take care of this instrument now before it's a problem, before I don't bounce back as quickly as I might have when I get a little hoarse and I'm 25.
Yeah, that I mean, and I will be honest, that is something that I have struggled with, getting used to that fact because I have always had a very resilient, voice. I got sick all the time in college, that, and like, but most of the time, even when I was like terrible and like feeling like I was dying, like my voice was fine. I just, I might just not have been able to breathe or anything, but like my voice, it never really affected my voice. But now as I get older, like everything is affecting my voice. So like that's definitely something that like I really had to be like, okay, like I can't pretend that I'm 21 anymore and just, sing however I want, however long I want, and then just be fine the next morning. I got to be careful now. So speaking of that, last time you were on the podcast, you talked about the importance of warmups and more specifically warmups for us as the teacher rather than like something that we lead for our students. Can you share some specific exercises teachers can use either like in the drive to work or throughout the day that they can use to protect their voices?
Well, I'm very big on using the time that you have because I know that when you're teaching, time is a precious commodity and your day starts right at the top of the day and you hit the ground running. And so we mentioned the car. I think the car is one of the best places to get yourself ready to teach. Um, so I would definitely say, pay attention to your tension. If your neck is a little tight, if your shoulders are a little tight, roll that around a little bit in the driver's seat. Just let yourself be loose up in the upper part of your body. I would say work on some deep breathing. If we're talking about music teachers in particular, most of them have had an undergrad where they've taken voice lessons. They have learned something about how to breathe. And so you want to breathe deeply like you are getting ready to sing yourself and like you would tell your students to breathe, and do a few deep breaths and just in and out, and do that a few times. And then I think some sirens are always good to kind of get the resonance system going. We have to understand that when we are speaking or singing and we're doing it correctly, we're working with, not against acoustics. And so the acoustical principle of, let's say, if you're singing in a trailer, it doesn't sound as good as if you sing in a cathedral. Why? Because the cathedral has these hard stone surfaces and a tall roof. So you want to kind of create those optimum conditions in your mouth. So you might start with some or just some gentle sirens like that, just to kind of wake your voice up, kind of get the upper resonance going in your voice so that, the morning fog is kind of gone. And then you might say some stupid things that kind of help bring the focal point of the sound into the sensation into the front of your face. Stuff like, my mom made me marry a millionaire. Mary made me meet Marv. Whom do you choose? How now, brown cow? Anything like that, where they're stupid, but they work. And maybe just some very gentle humming, or me, 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 just to kind of get the voice itself warmed up and yourself kind of using the voice on the breath the way you do when you sing. That's a great way to prepare for your day.
And I love that a lot of those, like,
Mhm.
they're kind of silly, but let's be honest. If you ever taken a vocal lesson or walked by a lesson room, someone taking a vocal lesson, we're doing all kinds of random crazy things. But they do have a purpose. So I love that you mentioned a lot of different options. I get a lot of questions about cool down exercises. Like, all right, I just did it this entire day of teaching and I've been singing and shouting and doing all these things. Are there any strategies or techniques for vocal recovery or things that you can do so that you're not just like, all right, I did all these things and now I'm done? So we can kind of take care of it that way.
Sure. So I think of starting kind of in the middle of your range and going down. Maybe doing that on a vowel. Ah, ee, ooh. Because if you've been kind of talking at a heightened level, you just kind of want to settle the voice down. Now, this one is going to blow your mind because we think of this as a bad thing, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later as a bad thing. But vocal fry, which is this sound, can actually be good for vocal recovery. If you just do it a little bit, just let that go for maybe 20 seconds. Just let it, because you're just letting everything relax. You're letting all the tension go away. And just settling the chords down. And so I think stuff like that coming from the top down is great. I think for sure after school, when you don't have to worry about going to the bathroom all the time, is a great time to start really pushing the water. That's a huge recovery strategy. Drink your water, get some herbal tea going, start hydrating after your day, particularly if you've been in one of those dusty, poorly designed rooms all day. You need to hydrate.
Yeah, that right there is the huge thing. If you learned anything from this episode, drink your water. I know that it's rough. I went my schedule my first year as a teaching. There was no time in between, and then between classes. And then after that, or the last few years, I had like 5 minutes in between. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I can run to the bathroom real quick if I need to. And I was just able to drink so much more water. And wouldn't you know, my voice at the end of the day just felt so much better because I was doing what I was supposed to do. So yeah, so important.
Yeah, and you can, I know that that's a real issue for teachers. I know it is. You can try to do some of it like early in the morning, like while you're getting ready, so that that goes through you before you start teaching. And then, as you can throughout the day, but then that after school time till maybe, 7 or 8, when it would then possibly keep you up at night, you want to hydrate as much as you can. It's what you do in a 24-hour period, not necessarily what you do right while you're teaching. That would be ideal, but don't think because I can't drink a lot while I'm teaching, it won't matter when I drink in the day. It does matter, and it will help.
For sure. So I was going to ask you the question, what are some common vocal care mistakes you see teachers making? But I kind of want to focus it in a little bit more because there are so many teachers that are teaching music, particularly general music, that are not vocal majors or have not gone through any vocal training. So I'm curious, what do you see, or what would you have these, maybe instrumental majors who kind of fell into elementary music, what would you recommend, or what are some things that they can look out for to make sure that they're not making some common mistakes?
Sure. Most of our mistakes come from speaking at a wrong pitch, a wrong volume, a wrong rate, or a wrong duration. Okay, those are kind of the keys for vocal fatigue, vocal abuse. And so the way I like to address those things are through what I call the 3 R's. All right, number 1, the range you're speaking in. All right, so what is a good range for me to speak in? We want to speak in a natural place for us. And there are a couple ways you can find that for yourself, even if you're not a singer. You can think about the last 2 or 3 notes that if you were singing, if you're just goofing around, singing and, or you're singing in church or something, about the last 2 or 3 notes where it's comfortable. Okay. At the bottom of your range, that's about where you should be speaking. I'm not talking about what you can burp out. Okay. Because like I can sing down here, but that's not where I'm talking. Okay. That's not really comfortable. But like around, that's about where I speak. Okay. About that last third. Another really good concrete way is to pretend you're answering a question in the affirmative by saying, So, So say, my name is Bryson.
My name is Bryson.
That's right where you speak. So where you do that naturally, it's a good tip, is about where you should be speaking. We don't want to be up here with our larynx really lifted. Okay. We get this a lot sometimes with younger female teachers. Okay. We don't want this. And we also don't want, I'm trying to sound authoritative, so I'm going to push my larynx down and I'm going to talk down here. You just want to speak at a natural range for you. So 1 R is range. Another R is resonance. And we talked about this a little bit with the exercises I was suggesting that you do. Sound should generally feel like it's coming forward. It should not feel like you are talking kind of down here. I suggested vocal fry for a cool down, but you don't want to talk like this all day. Okay. This is not good for your voice. It's low energized. It doesn't have breath connected to it, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. You also, like I said, don't want to talk up here in a really nasal voice. Okay, you just want the resonance to be sort of where you would say, or my mom made me marry Marv, where we're aiming the sound out. I think sometimes there's a stigma around speaking correctly, because I think people, particularly people who've been exposed to singer types, think that it means you have to walk around talking like this, which is ridiculous. You don't. But you do want to think about healthy, focused, in the right range. So you've got the right range, you've got the right resonance, and then respiration. Okay. It's very easy not to breathe. All right. When we are talking, especially when we are getting really frustrated with the class and we just keep going and going and going and we don't come up for air and we don't take a breath. And I really need you to stop that. And then we take a breath. You need to be breathing about every 5 to 10 seconds. Syllables, not seconds. About every 5.
Wow, that's impressive.
About every 5 to 10 syllables. would be a decent benchmark. And obviously, I know you're not thinking about that when you've got, 20 some kids in front of you, but it's something you can practice. It's something you can practice. You can practice it just picking up a book and reading it and trying to employ these principles of speaking in a good range, speaking with a good resonance, so that they become habitual. But we need to breathe. Again, I wouldn't expect a non-music teacher necessarily to think about that. So that's why I'm saying it. But even music teachers who've had vocal training forget to breathe.
Yeah.
Yeah. They'll tell their kids to breathe, but they'll forget to breathe. So range, resonance, and respiration, very important.
Yeah, those are the big again, I know I talked about water being the big point to pull out, but like that's the big part of this episode.
For sure. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I would love to briefly kind of pull out a thread about the connection between mental health, stress, and vocal health, because I think anecdotally we know that when we're stressed, our voice tends to be more of a loose cannon. So I'd really be interested in how managing stress can contribute to better vocal care.
Sure. Well, stress manifests itself in a lot of different ways in our body, and some of them we're very aware of, and some of them we're not. We've heard probably the phrase, "the body keeps score." So whatever you're going through, whatever stress you're dealing with, your body is tuned into that. And that can result in different kinds of stress playing out. There's sort of the obvious kind where we get very tense. All right. I see this a lot in singers I work with. There's a lot of different places people hold tension in their body. Some people tend to hold it in the neck and shoulders. A lot of people hold it in the neck and shoulders. A lot of people hold it in the belly. Some people hold it in the jaw, where we're just compressing and tightening. And so when we're stressed, our body kind of goes into those kind of grabbing postures, and we can put a lot of pressure down on the voice. Some people, when they're stressed, if it plays out in sort of more of a depression, we can kind of go the other way, and it can be very low energy, where we kind of are going back down to that vocal fry, and we just don't have the energy to support our sound. Sometimes it can just play with our health. Stress is a real factor in getting sick. And then that leads into the whole minefield of having to teach while you're sick. So I think the biggest thing to say, none of this is rocket science. I think the biggest thing to say about the body is that whatever is going on in your body is going on in your voice, because your voice is your body, duh. But we forget that. We forget that sometimes. The best part of a voice is that we have this handy carrying case. The worst part about your voice is that you have the handy carrying case of your body. So whatever's going on with you is going on with your voice. So if you take care of you, you are taking care of your voice.
Love that. So you actually brought up my next question, which is all about that minefield of teaching when we're sick. Because let's be honest, we have all gone into school when we definitely should not have, and we knew that we were only going to make it worse. A lot of my listeners, when we had our previous episode, asked about dealing with issues, especially vocal issues, when they're sick. What advice would you give to teachers for protecting your voice when you're under the weather, but you still, for whatever reason, need to teach?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to kind of deal with that elephant in the room and put a couple caveats on that. First of all, you have to define need to teach. All right. Obviously, I know there's, you're trying to save your sick days. You are preparing maybe for a concert. Maybe you're just getting to a place with your class. It's like early in the year and you don't want to break the rhythm. I know there are a lot of reasons to go to work when you're not feeling well as a teacher. And some of those are very legitimate, and it's just what you have to do. But I would also say, don't be a hero. If taking a day off or 2 days off keeps you from taking the whole week off the next week, take the 2 days. All right. If you are sick with a voice-related illness, we recognize illness when we have a fever, or perhaps if we're vomiting, we understand, okay, I'm sick. But sometimes if we just have a bad case of laryngitis, we feel kind of guilty because we feel okay, but the voice is sick. And it's better to do a little preventative care A day of being really quiet at home, you'd be amazed what that can do. The voice is actually very resilient. But that being said, that caveat being given, if you have to teach sick, yeah, there are a few things that you can do. I think I have sort of 3 voice savers for the classroom that I want to talk about. I want to talk about over, under, and into. Okay. So, over, this is a technique that almost every teacher learns. You know, you learn it in your student teaching, if not before. Get their attention with something other than your voice. Snapping, clapping, tapping, you work out a creative signal. Maybe you give them a pattern, you clap a pattern, they clap it back to you, but you work out a signal for getting their intention that does not work, that does not use your voice. Okay, so you're going over that noise with some other kind of noisemaker. All right, that they get used to and they start to recognize, oh, okay, it's time for me to pay attention. So that's over. There's under the noise. We want to talk under the noise. Our tendency is always to talk over the noise. It's loud, and so we want to rise to this. Have you ever noticed with a class? I know you're a good teacher, Bryson. I know you taught, and I know you're a good teacher, and I know you know the value of what I'm about to say. Sometimes when you get really quiet, it shocks them, and they listen. Yeah. If you can talk under the noise sometimes, can you do it all the time? No. But it's a good technique. Bring it down. Wait for them to get quiet and then make them listen to you by talking under the noise. If you need to say something to a specific student or a group of students, you're going to talk under the noise and you're going to use the other one. So we've got over, we've got under, we've got into. You're going to walk into your students. All right. I suggest, if you can, having them in a circle, having them around you. I think that's always a good technique. But I think especially when you're not well, then you're not trying to speak to kids who are in rows, 2 and 3 rows back. Bad idea. Plus, they're doing, heaven knows what in the back row, right? So if you have them in a circle, you can walk into them and you can talk to them, and that enables you to talk under the noise. So over, under, and into is a good principle. I think when you're under the weather, you have to get a little bit creative. Okay, I'm going to speak from a music teacher perspective, but I'm sure there are parallels no matter what you teach. Find a way to use the time in a way that uses your voice load the least possible. So maybe today we are going to work on playing. We're going to play with instruments. Okay, we're not going to do a lot of singing. You're sure not going to do any demonstrating. Maybe you're getting your kids ready for a performance and you've been stopping and starting a lot in rehearsals. Maybe you give them a day and you say, okay, you know what? Today, I'm just going to let you sing through your music. I'm just going to sit here and play the piano or play the accompaniment, whatever, and let you sing for me, and we'll just see where you are today. And you don't try to make it the greatest pedagogical feat that ever happened. You literally get through the day. Okay. And you let them sing their stuff. Maybe you do some work on a board. You let the kids come up. Maybe you let them play a game. Maybe you work on dance that day. Maybe you, kids love, especially I think younger kids, they like to talk. They like to share. Let them share. Make some kind of a sharing hour where they talk about what they've been learning, or where you let a kid play a game that the kids already know and you let them lead the game. Just little things like that, where you shave off a little of your vocal load each period throughout the day. All right. And that does add up. Let them listen to some recordings of maybe the stuff they're working on. There's a lot of stuff. I know you know this, teachers know this. There's a lot of stuff out there, like on YouTube, where somebody's teaching a song. Let them learn a little bit that way. You just have to get a little creative and be okay with them learning a different way. The kids don't mind. They're happy to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you bring up a really good point, which is obviously there are going to be times where we just need to not come in. But sometimes there are going to be those times where, for whatever reason, we're going to be here. And I think another good thing that came out of COVID is a lot of people were creating a lot of online resources. So the last few years in the classroom, if I had it, needed a day or had a sick day or something, I would bring in quote unquote guest teachers, which is basically utilizing the, YouTube recordings of somebody teaching a new song rather than me teaching the new song, having the, whoever teacher recorded it for their YouTube channel, having them be that teacher, or even, recordings that I had done for virtual learning that I repurposed into something that I can pull out there, which can be really good. And kind of a tip off of that is, I know a lot of times teachers are like, oh my gosh, if I take one day off, then the whole rotation is going to be off and it's going to be this whole mess. Give yourself time, or, if you're sick, give yourself the ability to teach the sub plan. Music, like if you have sub plans that are anything that are related to music and that can bring them closer to that understanding and the love and the understanding of the standards and things like that, just because it wasn't what you would normally teach or how you would normally teach, just finish out the rotation using the sub plan. Especially if it's something that will also take care of your voice. I think that's something that you give yourself permission to do that. Because I found a lot of help once I kind of let go of it's going to mess up the rotation and just kind of realize, well, this is what we're going to insert a lesson here. That really helped me, especially when, things got a little wild and we needed more time off than I expected.
Well, and it's also part of that is playing the long game too. Saying to yourself, okay, if I have to use a sub plan today, that is better than me pushing through, and then ending up really getting myself sick and really wearing my voice down to where I'm out of commission for 3 or 4 days. You have to think that way. It's better to deal with something at the outset because it's cumulative. If you just keep letting yourself get sicker. Another thing I would add here, and this goes for whether you are well or sick, I think one thing music teachers are really bad about doing all the time is demonstrating. And you don't need to do that all the time. You may need to sing some things for them or with them while you're sort of teaching them the music, but you don't have to do that every day. And I think it's something people do. I don't think people set out to do it. I think it just kind of happens. But that's especially hard on low voices that are trying to sing with the very, very high voices of little kids, especially, or, with the sopranos and you have a very low voice. If you need to demonstrate in your own octave, and do it briefly. Okay. And you can kind of tell them that I'm not going to keep doing this, kids. We got to learn this music. We're going to learn it. I want you to listen. We're going to sing it back. And then they know that isn't going to happen. Every day isn't going to be Groundhog Day. You're not going to come in and keep doing that for them.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, like, if you are constantly singing with them, they will never feel like they need to be confident singing because they always have you. But like, if you were like, all right, I'm not singing this anymore, or like, I'll sing like, one of the things I would say is, I'll sing with you, but I'm not going to sing for you, things like that. And then eventually be like, all right, this is all on you. And the more you do that, not only is this just a good pedagogical tip, but then again, we tend to sing with them more than they need us to. So give them credit, give them the opportunity to take ownership of it. And a lot of times they'll surprise you.
Yeah. And voice use is, it's a mosaic. Okay. It's a bunch of little pieces together. So doing little things to help yourself, they add up. Okay. Not demonstrating isn't going to save your voice. Just drinking water isn't going to save your voice. Talking but you put all that together and you use some judicious microphone use in there too. You're starting to create a classroom that is sustainable for you from August through May. Okay. Because that's what you've got to think. You've always got to be playing the long game through the year, through the next year, for however long you want to teach. It's playing the long game, and little things really do add up, and they add up the other way too. They add up, little bad things add up too.
So we've talked a lot about, like, do this, not that, do this, not that, do this. No. At what point, or, what things should teachers look out for when it's too far for them to fix? Like, at what point should they seek expert, medical care? And at that point, do they like go to their general doctor? Do they go to urgent care? What would you recommend in that way?
Yeah. Well, I would say that generally, and this comes from the doctors that we worked with during that singing health specialization. We were working with laryngologists. Laryngologists are a subset of an ear, nose, throat doctor. Okay, so they are specialists. They are throat specialists, the laryngologists. And so we talked to them, and they said their general rule for people was, anytime you have something going on with your voice for 2 to 3 weeks that you can't trace to something else, you should go and see a doctor. So here's what that means. If you have bronchitis and you are coughing your head off and you've been to your GP and you're on an antibiotic and you're still hoarse and you're coughing, guess what? You're hoarse and you're coughing because you have bronchitis. All right. And you're going to get better and you just need to give it a minute, right? If your allergies are terrible, probably you're just dealing with your allergies. Take your allergy medicine. It's when you're hoarse with kind of out without a cause that you need to start to be concerned. All right. When your voice is just tired all the time, scratchy all the time, you're hoarse all the time, and you're doing all the things, you're drinking your water, you're doing all the good classroom things, you're budgeting your voice outside of the classroom, and you just can't shake it, that's when it's time to go see somebody. All right. What Depending on your insurance, you might be able to just go to a laryngologist. Some plans will make you go to your GP first. And you would just go in and say, this is what's going on. And I really think that I need to see I would like to see an ENT, and they can usually help you make that happen. And I think a lot of people don't do this. There's a lot of reasons. We don't like to go to the doctor. Nobody likes to go to the doctor. It's scary, and we don't want to take the time. But what happens is when it's something going on with our voice, because we are, as teachers, professional voice users, we're worried about it. I'm hoarse. I can't shake it. What am I going to do? And that drama builds in the mind. And instead of just going to the doctor, we get more and more worked up about going to the doctor. So we don't go to the doctor. So the symptoms get worse. So we don't go to the doctor. Just go. Probably it's not something super serious. It's probably not.
It's probably acid reflux.
I was just going to say that. A lot of people have acid reflux, where it's basically just stomach acid that kind of comes up into the esophagus, usually overnight, irritates your cords. That's tied to diet. It can be tied to heredity. It can be tied to stress. But there's good meds you can take to really help you with that. That's a very common thing. I myself have had voice students where in my head, I didn't tell them this, but I thought to myself, I think something is really wrong with those vocal cords. I'm very worried. And so I wanted them to go see the doctor. And then they come back and I'm very concerned what they're going to say. And it was reflux. And it was just a lot of irritation in the cords from that acid. And they were able to get a medicine and get better. Even if it's some swelling or a little growth that has started, if you go early, a doctor, a speech pathologist, there's usually a team in conjunction with your doctor that's a speech pathologist. They can give you tips and tricks and help you know what to do. And voice exams, they aren't the most fun. They're not a day at Disney, but they're quick and they're not really painful, just a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would feel like the word that I would use to describe it was just weird.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't enjoy it. I wouldn't recommend doing that like recreationally, but like, it's not terrible.
No, it's not terrible. It's not terrible. And it's very quick. They're in and out and you get to see your vocal cords. And so, yeah, I would say anything that goes on for a couple weeks where you're just not able to shake it, I would go see a doctor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I will say I've done it both ways on different insurances where I had to get a referral first, and I literally just walked in and said, "Hey, I'm a music teacher. I want to get my voice scoped," and they're like, "Okay, cool." And then I've also done it where I just said, "Hey," I called up the laryngologist. I'm like, "Hey, I'd like to get my voice scoped." And they're like, "All right, cool, let's do it." So that's a good thing. And what's great is if you're able to do it, they're able to have kind of a baseline. So that way, if you have any issues down the road, you have something to compare it to. Because literally it's just like, it's like a video and like a strobe video and pictures of your instrument, which first of all is kind of cool to see as someone who doesn't get to, pick out a new mouthpiece or, figure out, is my French horn going to have the horn that comes off, like being able to actually see your instrument is kind of cool. So Dr. Whitehead, you are going to be leading a workshop inside that music teacher community in March. So that's going to be really exciting because you're going to dive in even deeper into vocal health. But beyond that, which by the way, the link will be in the show notes. Do you have any recommendations for resources, books, courses, or anything else that you would recommend for teachers that are wanting to dive in a little bit deeper into into vocal health?
Sure. I will give you some of those resources, but there is one other thing I want to say, if you'll bear with me first,
Go ahead.
that I didn't get to say as explicitly as I want to. One thing that we have to do as professional voice users is we have to budget our voice. Okay, we have to look at it as a finite commodity. We all understand, especially teachers, that we have to budget our money because we're not making a lot of it, and we understand that. We understand that. We grow up with that idea, but we don't seem to put our voice in the same category. So, what I mean by that is, and I'm probably speaking perhaps mostly to younger teachers who, once if you're older, you have a family, you've got all these responsibilities. Some of this takes care of itself because you're just so tired. But you're young. Maybe you still want to go out and do things on the weekends, and it's not that you can't have any fun, but if your voice is tired, you need to shut up. That's the best medicine for a tired voice. Shut up. Go home after work and shut up. Um, Even if you're an extrovert, even if you want to go have some drinks with friends, don't do it when your voice is tired. Give yourself a night or 2 nights off. Monday's going to come whether you're ready for it or not. So don't go to a sporting event on Saturday and yell your head off. Go to the event, have a good time, but be aware, be constantly aware that you are a professional voice user. That's something I really want to get across to your listeners, Bryson, that when they're teaching, that is exactly what they are. They are somebody who uses their voice professionally, and they need to treat it as such. So really think about how you can budget your voice. As for some resources, there are a couple really good books out there right now. And then one other exciting thing that I want to tell you about. There's a book called Vocal Health for Singers by Dr. Anthony Yan. He is a professor and a laryngologist at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York City. He works with a lot of opera singers. He works with a lot of professional singers. And so you think, oh, how is that a book for me? I'm a teacher. Well, his book is in the form of question and answer. And there's
Oh, I love that.
it's great. There's 100 questions in there that singers have submitted. So some of them are very specific to singing, but they encompass a lot of things. They talk about diet. They talk about what you're drinking. They talk about humidifying and steaming your voice. So there's some good answers in there, even for a non-singer. That's a great text. There's a book that just came out in February of this year called The Working Voice, Vocal Health and Effective Communication. It's by Stephanie Martin and Olivia Darnley. Martin is a speech pathologist, and Darnley is a professional actor and voice coach. And they've put together this book that's kind of from that practical angle of a more broad brushed approach to voice use, the professional voice user in a lot of ways. There's another book by Maria Franca, also pretty new, came out in 2023, called Vocal Health in Professional Voice. Those are some written resources I'd recommend. You can go on YouTube and you can find a lot of good videos on just basic voice care. You know, there's some people that don't know what they're talking about. There are a lot of people who do, and a lot of it is basics that would be good for a teacher. Maybe not for an opera singer at an elite level, whatever, but they would be great for a voice professional in a teaching profession that just wants some tips. And one really exciting thing that has been developed over the last year is an app called Singer Savvy. And this app can help you track your voice use and track your voice load and track how you're breathing. There's a device, a professor at Northwestern University invented it. It comes with this little device called a voice minder, and it's like a little patch that you wear like on your neck. It's not big. It's like you could wear it under a shirt, and you can link it to the app, and it will tell you how naughty you're being with your voice. And even without that particular linking device, the app itself is great. It's got a lot of information on how to care for your voice, helps you track things like water, and it's a good tool. So those are a couple
I love that.
new.
I have to look into that. I'm really excited about that.
The Singer Savvy app. Yeah.
And once again, we will be having Dr. Whitehead giving a wonderful masterclass inside that music teacher community in March. So be sure to check that out as well. Dr. Whitehead, again, we could take this conversation so many different ways, and I'm so glad we could have you back here on the podcast. Thank you so much for doing what you do and being who you are. But also thank you for sharing your expertise with our listeners today.
Well, it was my pleasure, Bryson. It's always great to talk to you.
So thank you so much for joining us for this episode of That Music Podcast. If you have not left a review, please do us a favor and leave a review wherever you're listening. That really helps us understand what we want more of and what we need to dive into a little bit deeper. If you would like to join us in that music teacher community, be sure to check out the show notes and description. And as always, in case no one has told you lately, thank you so much for making a difference in the lives of the students that you teach.